right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You know how we do it here. We like to take a topic and just get into it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Unpack it, see what's really going on.
And today we're talking about a story that's really captivated people for, probably close to a century now, I guess it would be.
Yeah.
The Black Dahlia.
Yeah. Fascinating case.
Yeah. And to kind of guide us on this journey, we're going to be looking at a book called, it's in Swedish, I'm trying to say this right, The Black Dahlia. Mordelli por Elizabeth Short.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at some excerpts from that and kind of pulling out, some of the interesting details in this case for those of you who don't know.
Yeah, just to set the stage.
Yeah, set the stage. This is, a really notorious unsolved murder that happened in 1947 in Los Angeles.
It's one of those stories that it really captures the imagination because it's got it all, it's got this kind of like Hollywood glamour, sort of underpinning this really dark and gruesome story.
Yeah, like this dark underbelly of Hollywood.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the victim in this case. Elizabeth Short, she's often referred to as the Black Dahlia, but, she was a real person.
Yeah.
With hopes and dreams. And, let's kind of talk about her a little bit before we get into the nitty-gritty of what happened.
Sure. So Elizabeth Short was a young woman. She was only 22 years old when she was murdered. And she was an aspiring actress. She had come to Hollywood like so many others to try to make it big.
Just like countless others, right?
Absolutely.
Drawn to those bright lights.
Yeah. And unfortunately, her story takes a very tragic turn on January 15, 1947, when her body is discovered in a vacant lot in Los Angeles.
Yeah. And the way that her body was discovered was particularly shocking. That's kind of what gripped the nation's attention.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. The book describes this woman named Betty Bersinger.
Okay.
Who was walking with her 3-year-old daughter.
Oh, wow.
And she sees this, she thinks is like a mannequin.
Oh, God.
Just laying in this vacant lot. And
so creepy.
It's so creepy.
Yeah.
And so she gets closer and closer to it and realizes that, oh my gosh, this is not a mannequin. This is actual body.
Oh, my gosh. I can't even imagine.
And the condition that the body was in was particularly gruesome.
So let's talk about that, for those who might not be familiar with the details of what made this case so shocking. What was the state of Elizabeth Short's body when it was found?
So yeah, it was really terrible.
Yeah.
Her body had been severed at the waist, and her face was mutilated in a very specific way. It's called a Glasgow smile.
Oh gosh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, have you heard of that?
Yeah, it's a really disturbing way to disfigure someone.
Yeah, essentially it's like these cuts on the side of the mouth that make it look like the person is smiling.
Yeah, just a really grotesque image, and I can't imagine, coming across that like you were saying.
Yeah, it's just a horrifying thing to discover, and the fact that this woman was walking with her young daughter too.
It's even worse.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, so this immediately, captures national attention.
Right.
This is a huge story. Front page news across the country.
Oh, yeah. And this is also how Elizabeth Short gets that nickname, the Black Dahlia.
Right.
Because the press kind of latched on to this, this image of her with her dark hair, and they kind of connected it to a movie that was out at the time called The Blue Dahlia.
Ah, so it's like a play on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting how that kind of sticks.
Yes.
It becomes part of the whole mystique of the case.
Right. It's so much more catchy to say the Black Dahlia than to say Elizabeth Short. Right?
Absolutely.
So, obviously the LAPD launched this massive investigation to try to find out, who was responsible for this.
Yeah, I imagine the pressure was intense.
Oh, yeah, to solve this.
To solve it.
But there were a lot of challenges that they faced right from the beginning. One of the things the book talks about is just the sheer number of people.
Oh, yeah.
That were at that crime scene, like reporters and onlookers.
I bet.
Before, forensics could even get there.
Oh, man, that's got to be a nightmare from an investigative standpoint, right?
Yeah, the potential for contamination of the crime scene is huge, right?
Yeah, but you got people trampling all over, potentially destroying evidence.
Right, and on top of that, there were no witnesses.
So no one saw anything?
Nobody saw anything, and just the brutality of the crime itself made it really difficult to kind of narrow down motives. Yeah, suspects.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the suspects, because there were a lot of people that were looked at in connection with this case. One of the names that comes up again and again is this guy, Dr. George Hodel. So
Okay.
what's his story?
So Dr. George Hodel was a physician in Los Angeles, a very successful one at that, which is part of what makes him such a fascinating suspect. He wasn't some down on his luck, criminal. He was a respected member of society.
Right, like a pillar of the community.
Exactly.
And is a suspect.
Yeah, and as investigators started looking into him, they found some pretty disturbing things. There were allegations that he was involved in other crimes, and there was also this strange connection to the art world.
Okay, so the art world, what is that about?
So Hodel was a bit of an art enthusiast, and some of his paintings started to raise red flags for investigators because one of them, in particular, bore a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Short's pose.
Oh, wow. It's almost like he was recreating the crime scene.
Yeah, it's really eerie, and some people theorize that it could be, like a subconscious confession, or maybe even just this kind of twisted artistic expression of what he had done.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a huge coincidence, right? Like,
Mm.
what are the chances that he would paint something that looks so similar to that?
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder.
Yeah, so um, another suspect that was looked at was this guy, Mark Hansen. So what do we know about him?
So Mark Hansen owned a nightclub, and he actually knew Elizabeth Short.
Okay.
So, that right there makes him, an obvious person of interest.
Yeah, right.
But what's interesting is that despite that connection, investigators just couldn't find enough solid evidence to tie him to the crime.
Okay, so another dead end.
It seems like it, yeah.
Yeah, this case has a lot of those, it seems
Yeah.
like. It does. So there's another suspect that I wanted to talk about because I find him very interesting. This guy, Leslie Dillon.
Okay.
So he was a bellhop and an aspiring writer.
Interesting combination.
I know, right? So he actually contacts the LAPD.
What?
Yeah, he sends them letters with his own theories about the murder.
So he's like an armchair detective.
Yeah, kind of, but obviously the LAPD's like, who is this guy?
Yeah, why is he writing to us?
Yeah, and they actually end up bringing him in for questioning.
Oh, wow, so he becomes a suspect.
Yeah, because his letters are so detailed and specific that they start to think that maybe he knows more than he's letting on.
Try it, like he's almost too knowledgeable.
Right, yeah. So they detain him for a while, but they ultimately release him because they can't find any evidence to link him to the crime.
So another false lead.
Yeah, it's just crazy how many twists and turns this case takes.
Yeah, so we've looked at all these suspects and heard all these theories, but where does that leave us? Was the Black Dahlia the victim of a serial killer? Was this a crime of passion? What do we think?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yep.
And the book really does a good job of laying out all the different theories
Yeah.
and the evidence, or lack thereof, that supports each one.
So it doesn't really give us a definitive answer?
No, and I think that's part of what keeps people coming back to this case.
Absolutely.
Because we still don't know for sure.
Yeah, we want to know who did it, why they did it,
Yeah.
and the fact that it remains unsolved, it just adds to that mystery.
Right, and it really makes you think, like, how is it possible that a crime this brutal,
Yeah.
with this much attention, could just go unsolved?
Right. I mean, it makes you wonder what else is out there, what other mysteries are hidden, just beneath the surface.
Right, and I think it also speaks to the limitations of, forensic technology. At the time, we didn't have DNA testing. We didn't have all the tools that investigators have today.
Sure.
So it's possible that the evidence was there, but they just couldn't, piece it all together.
Yeah. Well, and we've come a long way in terms of criminal profiling and understanding, the psychology of killers.
Yeah.
Back then, that was a very new field, so.
So it's possible that, with today's technology and knowledge, that this case could be solved. But who knows?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Time will tell.
Well, and what I find so interesting about this case is that even though it happened, so long ago, Elizabeth Short's story continues to fascinate people.
Oh, absolutely.
She's become this almost like mythical figure.
Yeah, the Black Dahlia, it's almost like a legend. It's more than just a murder case. It's this kind of cultural touchstone.
Yeah, and her story has been told and retold in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Books, films, documentaries. There's even been a video game.
Wow, I didn't know about the video game.
Yeah, so it's clear that her story continues to resonate with
Yeah.
people. And I think it's because it taps into this very primal fear.
Yeah, the fear of the unknown, the fear of violence, the fear that something like this could happen to anyone.
Right. And it makes you question, like,
Yeah.
what is it about this case that continues to grip our imaginations? Is it the brutality of the crime? Is
Yeah.
it the mystery surrounding it? Is it the fact that it happened in Hollywood? This place that's supposed to be all about glamour and beauty.
I think it's all of those things and more, it's like a perfect storm of elements that just came together to create this enduring mystery. And it really makes you wonder, what would have happened to Elizabeth Short if she had never come to Hollywood? Would she still be alive today, or was her fate sealed the moment she stepped off that bus?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, it really makes you think about the choices that we make in life and how they can lead us down very different paths.
Yeah. And it also makes you wonder, what other secrets are hidden in the annals of Hollywood history? I mean, we've all heard the stories about the casting couch and the dark side of fame, but what other unsolved mysteries are out there just waiting to be uncovered?
Yeah, I mean, I bet there's a lot more than we even know about.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
So after this deep dive, what do you think happened to Elizabeth Short? What details stand out to you? I mean, there's so much more to this story than we could possibly cover in, just one conversation.
Absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's a case that invites you to do your own research, to explore the different theories, to come up with your own conclusions.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe one day the mystery of the Black Dahlia will finally be solved. But until then, I think it's important to remember Elizabeth Short as a real person, with her own hopes and dreams, and to acknowledge the tragedy of her untimely death.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Black Dahlia case. If you're interested in learning more about this case, there are tons of resources available online and in libraries, and we encourage you to check them out because there's so much more to this story than we could ever cover in just one episode.
It's a rabbit hole you could go down for days.
Absolutely. So until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.